Hi, good evening guys, and welcome to an offline ethics sessions by Civilsdaily. And today it's a special session because we've got a special guest for you guys. We've got Rahul Garg, who's already in services. He cleared UPSC in 2015 and he's been serving in the department of ICAS, and he has scored very well in his ethics papers in the UPSC examination, and also he is an author of an ethics books which is Ethics and Morality from Vice to Virtues. So I think he's got a bundle of experience with respect to ethics. And today when he comes here, he's not only coming as somebody who's been a student who's read the same books that you guys are going to read, but he's also bringing his official experience of real job into how ethics work in a workplace. Okay, so he'll be taking some of the case studies from his workplace also and talking about the realities of how administration works, and I think that will help you to cater the answer writing with respect to case studies. So I think this is going to be a very wonderful session for you guys. Online guys, if you have any doubts, just put it in the chat box. We'll take care of each and every doubt and we'll make sure that Rahul answers that. Okay, so Rahul, please, we welcome you so much, and this is basically a token of thanks from our team to you for coming and taking out time. Okay, thank you so much, and now completely the stage is yours.
So how do we use it? Right. So hello everyone and very warm welcome to this particular lecture. I'm honored of being part of this lecture, being on that side of the table to coming to this side of the table. And it gives me immense pleasure today that I have this opportunity to share my experiences with you. Because when I was preparing, ethics was effectively a very theoretical subject in which we have to mug up definitions, we have to mug up some points, we have to mug up some theories, and we have to reproduce them in the exam in a more structured way. After giving exam and after coming in the services, when I look back at the recent UPSC papers, I do realize that some mugging up is required. So it is not completely baseless. But after spending some time in the government, what I have realized that if I have been given an exam copy which I have to check, then I might not be very much interested in what everyone is writing, because that I already know. So what is going to capture my attention is what has captured my attention during my service period, because that is what I have gained over the years, and similar thing would happen with the examiner who is going to judge your books. So when I come here, when I'm talking to you, I can simply say that probity means this 1, 2, 3, 4 and so on. And in this 1, 2, 3, 4 you can include integrity, honesty, objectivity. I have also brought a list of those terms: accountability, transparency, so on, which is fine, which you will need. You need to understand those terms, and I will in a very short while going to come back to this, that what exactly these terms mean and what they mean in this context. But what exactly probity means? What do you understand by the term? Anyone of you, would you like to volunteer? What do you think probity means? I guess being truthful, integrity, being independent. You are again using the same term. So can you tell me in practical terms, how can I make anyone understand what integrity means? Most of you would have read about it, I'm very sure, in a book or lecture or in some particular article or something. Probity simply means being corruption free. It's as simple as that. If how you are going to ensure that you are corruption free, from that question flows everything: integrity and objectivity and honesty, because they help you in ensuring that how you are working is corruption free. So, bringing you a practical tip: if you want to write any answer and you are in doubt what is related to probity or not, think about corruption and its absence. So, if someone asks you what are the causes of lack of probity in governance, you can think about the causes of corruption. And even if the answer might not be 100% correct, which I'm going to come in a little while, what is the subtle differences, but broadly you will be covering the same pointers. So that is an easy way to understand probity in governance. So if somebody says what are the impacts of lack of probity in governance, then those are effectively the same impacts that you write in the impacts of corruption. So it leads to loss of legitimacy for the government, public waste resources get wasted, then poor service delivery and so on. So this point, if you understand this point, that probity is effectively corruption free, then it is effectively a very great conceptual jump that you will face, because otherwise you will get lost in definitions. Definition is important, and please don't write this that probity is being corruption free in exam. This is for the purposes of understanding. For writing in exam, there are some standard things that you should have: an introduction, there should be a body, and then there should be a conclusion. That all of you know, so I won't delve into this too much. But sometimes you need to realize that this is the structure that everyone knows. This is the structure that every year 4 to 5 lakh candidates start from this structure, but not all of them clear UPSC. And why does this happen? Because this does not get translated into this. So you have to be conceptually clear, and you have to convert that conceptual clarity into this pattern. This pattern is not the end in itself, and that is one of the ethical theories: end in itself, or you want to focus on the means. So this is just a means, it is not an end. Unless and until you bring this clarity into this format, your answer won't reflect your understanding. And from my side, because I have also checked papers of the, I would say, probationers who come into the services, and during their probationary exams they give many exams, and when I actually started checking their papers, I realized that when you have to check, say, 100 copies and you have little time, then you won't be really reading every word. So you will have to make the examiner read, and you have to make sure that your message is loud and clear to that particular examiner. And it is from that point of view I would like to focus on this conceptual clarity, so that you can convert this through this to this. How to convert that? That is again a point in this lecture, which I will cover at the fag end of this particular lecture. But in the meantime, let me bring you one current example, and through that we are going to look at some of the concepts that we have in probity in governance. Okay. So I think so, how many of you that Government of India runs more than 30 scholarship schemes? 30 scholarships of various nature: pre-metric, post-metric, for tribal students, for SC students, for OBCs, minorities, merit companies, and so on. And all of them are routed through one portal, which is National Scholarship Portal. So what if you obtain a WhatsApp message in the morning that I haven't received my scholarship for more than 3 months. If my scholarship does not reach me, then I will commit suicide. What do you do? Inform what? So grievance portal is going to, as per the CP grams, I think you would have heard about CP grams also. How many of you have heard about CP grams portal? Have you ever heard? So this portal stipulates that you have to respond within 1 month. So in 1 month, I think the timeline that the person has set for the suicide will exceed by at least 29 days. So what are you going to do? And again, now coming back to the ethics aspect, what are the core ethical issues here? Scholarship. So there is very little information that I'm providing. One is WhatsApp message. Then there is suicide threat. The point here is that, which I would like you to focus on, is that this information is not enough to solve this problem. Because many a time people focus on suicides and messages and so on. So the first part of solving any case study is to focus on the critical pieces of information. You are working in government. Your phone number may be available to many people. In this WhatsApp message, based on what I just told you, there is no information regarding which scheme it is, no person details. So for example, even if you try to find out where exactly the scholarship is pending, how will you find that out? You don't know. So never be afraid of realizing that some information is lacking. So even if you want to help in this particular case, which I take in an idealized scenario, you don't have enough information. And I told you, just for the sake of it, that there are more than 30 schemes. So you cannot be sending this message, sending a hue and cry and panicking message to every department or police, so and so has happened. You are in the government, you need to behave responsibly. So for example, there was one case study which my teacher used to tell me, that suppose you are the district magistrate in one particular district and a bus falls into the lake. And the minister calls you कि कितने लोग मरे हैं. You cannot say कि बहुत लोग मर गए हैं, बहुत लोग मर गए हैं. No. Even though the tragedy is recognized, it is a bad thing. But being in the government, being in a responsible position, you cannot afford to be panicking. You cannot afford to lose your emotional control. So if you will look at the past several years paper, I think since 2013, you won't have a case study which directly asks about emotional intelligence. They don't ask about emotional intelligence directly. In fact, similarly on attitude, if you will find out how many direct questions on attitude, you will hardly find 2 or 3 questions. But how do they test that? Through these kind of situations. Somebody is about to commit suicide. Yes, it should be prevented. But the way to prevent it is not losing your emotional control. You have to act like a rational person. So one of the qualities of probity, which is objectivity, comes into play here. That you shouldn't lose emotional control and you should focus on what information is needed, how to tackle that situation. Next, you will have to ask, and in most of the situations, why I gave you this small example is, in most of the questions that UPSC gives, the detailed study, the case study would be almost half a page long. So you will have enough information. So first of all, learn how to read that case study while being objective and not losing emotional control in the facet of these terms. Look at what is the problem. The problem is that the scholarship is late. There is delay in scholarship. Okay. So there is delay in scholarship. So now once you have identified the core issue, there is delay in scholarship, then you will try to identify what are the core ethical issues. If it had been in a similar question in say GS2, then the answer would have been different. That perhaps there should be direct benefit transfer, there should be tie-up with colleges, the education itself should be free and so on. But this is a question related to ethics, so you will have to focus on the ethical aspects. Okay, so what are the ethical aspects? Ethical aspect one is poor service delivery. One is poor grievance redressal, which you talked about. Then another important issue is that why you? Aren't there, if obviously there are poor grievance redressal mechanisms, then how did he get your number? So what exactly is the reason that people are approaching you? So isn't there a field level official, or isn't there, if the person is accessing WhatsApp messages, then the person has the broadband access. So isn't there an RTI related issue? What is the RTI related issue? RTI Act says that there should be proactive disclosure of information. Proactive disclosure of information. Secondly, why is RTI important in probity? Now I would take a small detour from this case study and talk about why RTI matters and how it is relevant in this case study. Why does RTI matter?
It compels the officials to be alert, to be corruption free, to be efficient.
How does it compel anyone?
The information about their inefficiency is out, it affects them.
Okay. So basically there are, can I wrap this if it is okay? So we will just get back to this very soon. Oh, sorry. There is corruption, there is lack of probity because of two reasons. And both of them are related to information. First reason is people do not know the processes. People do not know कि क्या हो रहा है. Basically, am I the right person? Am I the right person to talk about scholarships? Suppose there is a state scheme in Chhattisgarh or Tamil Nadu, I might not even be related to it. So what exactly is the process of processing a scholarship payment? So people do not know the process they are a part of. They only know the front end. Secondly, there are people who know, but what they do is they engage in either ignorance or collusive corruption. There are only two questions. Either you know or you don't know. So if you know, you can ignore it or you can take advantage of it. On this also we have a case study which I will come on to. But right now let's focus on this. People do not know. So it is not about one particular thing, that what is the payment status of my scholarship. It is also about what is the process of scholarship payment. Who to apply? Who to apply? How to apply? When to expect? Where to expect? कि सरकार ने पैसा दे दिया, but how would it reach you? Where to expect it? And what are the service levels? In fact, a few years ago there was a study. One of the airlines posted on the airport big posters that 99% of our flights fly on time. And just because of that poster, the measured levels of dissatisfaction among the customers whose flights got delayed reduced substantially. Why? Because they started thinking that they are the unfortunate 1%. Otherwise, the things are going fine. And because of that poster, they started taking into account their good experiences. So you have to promise something if you want to hold something account. Because if someone says, how long is this page? Then you can measure. But you cannot say this page is longer than something or smaller than something, unless and until you have another measure to compare it. So your satisfaction or dissatisfaction levels from any service are going to be decided by the service levels you promise. So if you haven't promised any service level, this is bound to create dissatisfaction among people. Okay. So now coming back to it, who to apply? I don't know how many of you are aware, recently there was a study in Department of Science and Technology in which it was found that one of the districts in Telangana for one particular scholarship was cornering almost 13% of scholarships across the country. One district. And state of UP, which carries 18% of population, had only 2%. Why was it happening? Because many people weren't aware that they were eligible, and many people weren't aware how to apply to it. So if they haven't applied, then perhaps that is the biggest failure of the government system, because they haven't entered the system. How to apply? Many people, for example, I have a friend who is a researcher in IIT Delhi. So she is not ready to apply for any of the Department of Science and Technology schemes. Why? क्योंकि उसका कहना है कि यार फॉर्म बड़े भरवाते हैं, वो इतना पैसा नहीं देते जितना 6 महीने में फॉर्म भरवा लेते हैं. So how is also very important. When कि आप उस किस टाइमलाइन तक अप्लाई करना है. बट दीज आर ऑल प्रोसीजरल इश्यूज. बट ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है, बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट. When to expect and where to expect, especially in the scholarship case that we were talking about. For example, some of the scholarship payments are directly done to the respective college. So you might be feeling that I haven't received the scholarship, I'm yet to pay to the college. They are going to remove me from the college. My studies are going to suffer. But it is quite possible that government might have deposited the scholarship directly to the college. So are you aware of that? Who will tell you? Similarly, where to expect? Are you going to get cash? Are you going to get a voucher? Or you are going to get directly into the account? And I would like you to focus here, because this was ultimately the issue that we identified. So how many of you have more than 2 bank accounts? 2 or more? Do you have 2 or more bank accounts in any bank? Bank accounts. In which banks? Exactly. So we have one example in Bank of Baroda. and Punjab National Bank.
Also in Kotak Mahindra Bank.
Okay, Kotak Mahindra Bank also. So very good. Kotak Mahindra. Okay. So we have private sector representation also here. Okay. So what happens is, the student that we were talking about in this particular case study, in his application form, he had given the account number of this bank. So he was checking this particular account again and again and again. He even went to the bank, got his passbook updated, checked the e-statements and so on. But the payment was done during the Aadhaar payment bridge. Aadhaar payment bridge is, you take only the Aadhaar number, and based on the linking of Aadhaar and bank, you make the payment to this bank. So the payment in this particular case had already been done to this particular bank account 2 months ago. And the student never checked. Student was thinking that this particular account is deactive. And this particular checking, he could have done himself if he knew how to ensure the service levels and how to check. Because there is already a track NSP payments facility on the public portal of the ministry. So what seemed like a very dangerous case, one person might lose his life, and then there were many people would get into the questions like, who should we file a police report, or should we inform the respective ministry, should we inform the respective scheme owner, should we inform the respective state? But if you have the right information, then this information could have been accessed by that very person from a publicly available portal on the internet. But because of this information, this whole thing is happening. That is why RTI matters. RTI not only just gives you tools to find out the corrupt people, RTI helps you to make your life easier. And that is exactly the importance of RTI. Basically, when you have information, you can ask right questions. There are so many RTIs which can be asked, but are not asked because people do not know what to ask, what to write in that form कि ये information चाहिए. Because आपको process नहीं पता है. You do not know what is exactly the question to be asked. Many people do not even know that they have the right to information. So whenever you talk about probity in governance, make sure that you are tackling the aspect of information in that probity concept. Because what I have observed practically and what I have observed in the case studies, information aspect is one of the things that most people don't pay attention to. How can you make a better informed citizenry? A few days ago, I was talking to 1963 batch rank 1 officer. So now he has got very old. But he told, and I had a discussion with him regarding the use of social media by civil servants. So he gave me a mantra that whenever you are posting anything on social media, think about whether that particular post is going to create a better informed citizenry. If the answer is yes, then perhaps you are using the social media for the right purposes. If it is not going to lead to a better informed citizenry, then perhaps you should avoid it. Okay, so now right to information is clear. So when you ask right questions, you bring in transparency and accountability. So that is how RTI is related to transparency and accountability. But now coming back to the case study that we had. So we were talking about an NSP related case study. in which we focused on one aspect, first of all, information aspect. You have identified what is the core issue. The person is lacking in information regarding what has exactly happened to his payment status. So many a times what I've realized is people are calmed down when you ask them reasonable questions. The problem in India and in any country which has corruption problem is people are not listened to. People do not know who to tell. So even if you are not really solving his problem, if you can ask the person some details, or you can ask anybody in the respective ministry to ask that person some details, that what is exactly your application ID? You have applied for an scholarship. What is your application ID? Can you ask that? One simple question. So he will be assured that somebody is looking after it. That portal is not available. So whenever you are asking or solving any question related to government service delivery, that service might be law and order, that service might be health, education, scholarship, anything. Focus on that information aspect, because most of the problems originate from there. And this information is well established in ethical administrative literature. Its relationship with right to information, transparency, accountability is something that you can talk for days and days, and you will have enough content. Secondly, we talked about suicide. So if you are talking about suicide, then obviously somebody is in a very agitated state of mind. Then your persuasion. This is one of the topics, right, in the attitude chapter. So this concept was from one chapter, which was administrative ethics in your ethics, any book you pick up. This is from another. So are you really going to get into an argument to persuade that person? How will you decide? Again, this is all theory. I'm not really getting into any practical aspects. I'm asking you a theoretical question. Somebody unknown to you messages you after getting your number from a website. Are you going to get into an emotional conversation? Why or why not? See, the problem in persuasion is when in persuasion chapter there is a topic called persuader characteristics. Right. And in that persuader characteristics, you have several factors. If the person respects you, your audience, if you are in a position of authority, are you rushing it up? There are several factors. So again, without really telling you the right answer, you will have to apply these characteristics here without really mentioning that I'm applying theory. Okay. So again, theory but applied. And finally, all of us talk about a lot of technology. So technology. When I discussed this case study last time with a student, one of the students suggested that we should use AI ML to solve this kind of queries automatically in real time for faster response and so on. But I think there is a simpler solution. Again, combining this with technology. So if you have the right web services, you do not need really artificial intelligence blockchain, because the answer was available on the website of that particular ministry. Website, internet, simple. People are not using Excel in the government fully. So instead of giving very idealistic solutions like artificial intelligence and machine learning, Please avoid that. Give simple solutions. Put the information on website for the consumption of all. And finally, one characteristics which come into play in all this is your awareness. Your awareness, not the citizens. Why your own awareness?
Have some basic idea about how these things work. Where can we, how to.
I don't know how many of you are aware, but bureaucrats are in extremely high demand in private sector. Private sector is ready to pick them up at extremely high packages. Not because they are an expert in technology or governance administration, because they know the rules and regulations, which many people are not aware of. So, if you are not aware of what is happening in the government, why do you, for example, a few years ago, one question was asked in which you are going for the UPSC interview and there is an accident. So, are you going to save that person? What was the correct answer, if any of you remember?
Try to get permission from the UPSC.
The right answer included one aspect, that your interview is your right, which you have earned by passing the mains examination. So you can request a reappointment. That awareness, because many of us just fill the form, we do not read what exactly are the terms and conditions written there. That awareness is checked many a time in UPSC. So when we talk about these things, this whole question, this whole case study is effectively a test of your knowledge of RTI. Whether you know that there should be proactive disclosure under the RTI Act, and then combine it with the available technologies like website, internet, and its and very much availability after this recent geo revolution. I would say that we have more than 120 crore mobiles in our country. Telephonic penetration is extremely high. So perhaps with that mindset, can you combine that proactive disclosure with the websites of the respective ministry? If you will get into that, I'm going to talk to him, I'm going to ask someone to talk to him, I will chat with him, I will give emotional response, then that is not really going to cut the corner. A person who has actually worked in administration, he realizes that if he starts talking to a person like this, without really giving him, directly guiding him to the respective website. For example, I received that message and my only response was, I simply shared the link of track NSP payments with him. After that, I did nothing. And within 3 minutes, he had actually sent me the screenshot that he had checked his payment status. In the government, you cannot talk to people. So you have to think solutions like that. Therefore, if you are not aware of things, see, all this is coming from just one piece of information. So whenever you are facing any question, for example, now I will bring to a more traditional case study. I will just write main points related to the case study just to demonstrate a parallel thing how that can help. That there is a building and in which 3 floors were allowed, but it was built to the 6 floors and it collapsed and 4 people died. Question is very simple. Give reasons for such incidents taking place across the country. Suggest measures to prevent their occurrence. It was asked in 2017. Very simple question. What exactly, since I was part of this exam also, so I remember because I saw this case study. Why exactly, what exactly is the core issue here? The idea is that in 2017 there was a debate raging on National Building Code. National Building Code. So what was the debate? A National Building Code was launched, but it was so complex. It was so complex that nobody could read it. If you are not an engineer, you cannot read this code. So again, the question why I made this comparable case study is again the issue is of comparison. So most of the times people have this tendency that they are going to blame the contractor, blame the owner, blame this, that authority. But the idea is that if you have a national building code, first of all, its awareness should be high. It should be simple enough that people can read it. So if I am a house owner, I want to construct a house and you are expecting compliance from me, then you should have given me a code which I can read. Right? Otherwise, if I have to hire a lawyer to build my house, then perhaps it is not a very good code. What is the main complaint in GST? So many of the businessmen that I have talked to, their main complaint is that earlier we were filing our own returns. Now we have to hire a CA. So you have increased our expenditure, our revenue expenditure in our respective businesses by several times because we are paying tens of thousands of rupees to CAs for just filing GST returns. Why GST was considered to be a panacea for the tax ills of our country? Because it was expected that you will have very clear laws that you have 5%. For example, on an official visit, I went to Canada. They have very clear 8% or 7%, I don't remember, but 7% uniformly. Wherever you go, whatever you do, 7% flat. Matter ends there. If not 7%, then zero tax for some items. So very clear, no doubt. If you want to know about it, you can just Google it, and the first two links on the Google are going to clarify that this is what the matter is. So that clarity is needed. First of all, the enforcement issue comes next. The idea is when I expect that you should, I am assuming that you can. So being part of the government, if you are expecting citizens to follow some law, you are assuming that they can follow that law. If the normal citizenry is not understanding this code, then you cannot expect them to follow it. So next issue comes of enforcement. Right? And this awareness, if you are able to reflect in your answer, then your answer is gold. More than that, this is only a part of presentation, but this information is necessary. How you include it, where you include it, again that depends on your writing style. There are no rights and wrongs. I have seen people who were masters in creative writing in their colleges but couldn't really get into it. But there are people who are not very well versed in English, but they still cracked the exam because they were able to put in the right information, they were able to communicate it well. So one part is this part, which is finding the right information, being aware of the right issues. That's why when I say, when anyone says read newspaper is not just about GS 1 to 3. Newspaper is eminently about these issues. For example, I think a few months ago there was an issue that there were some elephants in one of the popular tourist sites in Kerala which killed several tourists. After that, the illegal local industry regarding the tourism came to light and the SDM simply put it down immediately. But again, if you start analyzing it, there are many issues related to the employment. Why was it not enforced till now? How will the loss of life will be taken into account and so on. So whenever you read newspaper, also think about the applications of what you have been reading. For example, one of the not recent, a few years back, Delhi government started home delivery of services. That you can just make a call and more than 100 services will be provided at your home. So can you use that piece of information in the context of probity in governance? Can you use that? So whenever you read a piece of information, think about how it can be applied to that question. Obviously, this is a harder route to take. You will not really get the results in one day, but I remember a quote from Rumi who says that love is like making dough. आटा गूंदने की तरह होता है प्यार. You have some flour, you put some water, you put some sugar, you keep rolling it, and after a few minutes you realize कि आटा बन गया है. Similarly, if you want to practice it, you will have to practice it daily. This thing won't come in one day. That is something you have to realize. You will have to practice it. Whatever you are learning in the theoretical book, unless and until you apply it here, it will remain useless. It will remain useless, and that's where I talked about the structure that I talked about. On one hand, you have core issues that you will have to identify in the case study, and after identifying that case study, you have to put in that structure, introduction, body, and conclusion. So we talked about how to identify core issues, and then it has to be converted to this, and it has to be converted through practice. Please don't assume that this will straight away come into the examination hall. Converting this into this is the major job in the exam. Many people focus only on this. If you have identified the core issue and you start writing the answer, because that's a mistake I did in my first attempt. I never practiced. So in ethics, my answers were half a page long. 50 words answer, because I will just write the core issue, then I will say, oh, what should I write next? So converting this to this requires practice. And that is why practice is essential for GS 1, 2, 3, 4, any exam. Because you cannot afford just this, you cannot afford just this. This is important. Without this, only that won't fetch you marks. And without that, you won't be able to really fill the pages that you need to, which is a practical reality of the exam. So on that note, I leave the floor open if you have any questions.
Right. Thank you, sir. So first we'll take offline questions and then we'll take online questions. So do we have questions offline?
So actually, how the probity is connected to this case study? I didn't get that connection. Like,
okay. Probity and this scholarship issue, right? Okay. Probity is corruption. And 3. When we talk about scholarships, what happens in any scholarship scheme? Government allocates a budget, and if that budget is not spent by the end of financial year, it has to be reported in the parliament. And it is often a reality that most of the scholarship schemes budgets are consumed. So what is the most often the complaint of the students? That diversion of this money, or parking of funds, or rent seeking, or exclusion or inclusion errors. Okay. So when we talk about probity in governance, probity has two kinds of factors. One is the push factor and one is the pull factor. So in push factors, you have strong enforcement, harsher laws, that you can prosecute a civil servant without really authorization from respective departments. That's how you push probity into the governance. But push factors across the world have failed. So what the whole world is going to is pull factors. And where is exactly the pull factor? That is in the information. So when we talk about scholarships, what is diversion? That ministry allocated say 1000 crores for the scholarship. You spend 200 crores out of this 1000 crores in administrative issues, in having meetings, in having lunches, in organizing conferences and so on. That is diversion, that it is not getting towards the purpose it was meant for. Then the parking of funds. Suppose Government of India releases from the Consolidated Fund of India in RBI, the funds go to the bank or implementing agency and they don't release it further. That is a classic corruption case. Not very much highlighted, but corruption. That agency keeps it but does not release it further. Then there is rent seeking. This is what used to happen when checks were issued. Even for the government employees' salary, people used to seek rent. कि सर हमारी सैलरी आई है, अरे चेक आएगा 4 दिन बाद नहीं है. So that also happens in scholarships. So then exclusion and inclusion errors. कि मैंने application दी, because you didn't pay a bribe, I rejected it. And I do not know, I will keep waiting for the scholarship. So these kind of issues happen. So to resolve it, from a probity perspective, you have two sides. One is the push factor, that you start making harsh laws. That if you are going to check the particular utilization certificates which are issued by the agency, you are going to check every individual, their certificates, whether who it was issued to, flana. Then there is a pull factor, that you empower the citizenry and they start asking questions. So what I've told you, if you are going to focus on the push factors in any questions related to probity, I would say in any question related to the government functioning, you are going to get into problem. Because the government is trying to reduce that interface between the government and the citizen. What is the e-filing of income tax? You are not going to interact, even though effectively income tax officials are hired for enforcing the tax law. But that instead of going for push factor in taxation transparency, you are going to go for the pull factor, that you are going to make for simple tax code so that people understand the slab. What is the simple tax code that government is talking about? Basically, right now there are so many exemptions that if you have bought a house of this amount, you get exemption of this. If you have bought this, you can get an exemption of this, for insurance this. And because of that, there are thousands of provisions related to the exemptions in tax. And no ordinary person can read that. So the government has issued a new slab that if you don't want to avail of any of those exemptions, then you can avail of a lower taxation rate. So that option is there. So that is why many people avail of that. So instead of the push factor, instead of having more officials trying to enforce things, you can have an aware citizenry and a simpler code, so that there is a pull factor for transparency, that I have, my gross income is this, my tax slab is this, calculation is simple, no ifs and buts. So what we are trying to do in this particular case study is we are trying to create a pull factor for probity by giving more information. Does that clear the?
Sir, we have few questions online also. So Abhimanyu asks, sir, in every answer of case studies, is it necessary to be compassionate, or should we follow utilitarian approach in most case studies?
Being compassionate means I don't think there is anyone in government or UPSC circles who is going to say that you shouldn't be compassionate. But the idea is, what is compassion? The understanding of compassion should not be in contrast to what we read in emotional intelligence. Okay, let me just focus a bit more on compassion. So from what I remember on the compassion, compassion has two components. One is empathy and an action orientation. So empathy is when you are able to relate to their emotions. That okay, the student is not able to get the scholarship, so I can feel his pain. Yes, I am in a problem. But that is empathy. For compassion, you should have an action orientation, that I want to resolve his problem. But compassion does not talk about how to resolve that problem. It only talks about intent to solve the problem. That intent should be there. You cannot say, I am not going to solve my problem, this is not my job. This is not my job is the worst answer in any ethics problem. So never give that answer. Everyone's problem is everyone's problem. That is the motto you go with in ethics paper. And unless and until you don't display that attitude, you are going to be considered a person lacking in compassion. But this action can have several ways. You can choose an action which is more suited to the government. You can choose an action which is not suited to the government. For example, if you start talking and calling that person, you are not help desk person. Understand that when you are in government, you will have a busy time. So you cannot get into that help desk thing. So you should be compassionate. There is no doubt about that. But please understand that compassion does not manifest in emotional foolishness. Compassion means an objective understanding of how you can resolve the other person's problem. It is not always related to emotion. Sometimes hard action may be required, but that is still going to fall into the category of compassion. So compassion does not mean making a mockery of the law and order or discipline. Great discipline can be great compassion also.
Right. Sir, Shweta is asking, how relevant is it to mention quotes in our answers, or should we add them in introduction or conclusion? What was your approach? Quotes.
Which kind of? So, for example,
she hasn't mentioned any kind of quotes.
We were talking about National Building Code. So, or similarly, then there will be
Quotes. Q-U-E.
Quotes. Q.
Yeah.
Oh, quotes. Okay, quotes. Regarding quotes, the idea of quotes is to put your thoughts in a better manner. There is no really good place to put up a quote if it does not fit in the flow of your answer. For example, in the attempt that I cleared the UPSC, Unfortunately, I did not use any quote in my essay exam, but I scored really well. I think I scored that year. I think I was in the top 10 or 15 in the essay marks. I didn't use any quote because I couldn't remember any quote that could fit in. So if you will go with a mindset that I should use a quote, then that is going to backfire. Now coming to where you should use in the body or introduction or conclusion. Think about what you're writing and where it fits. Some quotes fit in the body. For example, you are making a point regarding say information. For example, there is a Supreme Court, there was a Supreme Court Dinesh Goyal case regarding the RTI, in which it says that too much information is actually going to stymie the functioning of the government. So you can use that if you are answering a question related to RTI, too many RTIs or something like that. But just using it for the sake of using it will not fetch you marks. So I would say quotes are extremely contextual. Don't use any quote unless and until you know the context of it. Because the idea to use quotes is very much, I would say, in trends that we should use quotes, we should quote thinkers and that, so on and so on. But unless and until you understand a quote firmly, please don't use it. And once you know the context of that quote, you will know yourself where it fits in.
Right. Sir, Suvidhi is asking, how did you study or practice your ethics paper and what was your approach?
Okay. So how did I study ethics? This is a long question, but
yes, sir, you could answer this
trying to make
as you want.
Okay. So at that time when I was preparing, there was no really a standard book. So actually that was the idea why I wrote this book, because there is no standard book. So what I used to do was I used to use articles on the university websites of many of the philosophers. For example, Stanford has a site of Plato philosophy. Even though the word is Plato, but they have a lot of articles almost related to every thinker. So I used to use that website very extensively. Then my second approach was to use newspaper, which I quoted today also. When I talk about newspaper and ethics, many of us assume that we are talking about ethical articles in newspaper, which have a keyword like governance, transparency, accountability. No. Even in simple news items, you may have questions related to the ethics. For example, many times there are budgetary debates. Where should you spend the money, on education or on security? That in itself is an ethical question if you really look at it. So unless and until you get into the habit of looking at the news items from an ethical perspective, for example, that very famous case study regarding the school children refusing to eat the food made by a Dalit cook, that is a very famous case study. That was effectively a news item. So it has been also a trend that many of the items that you get in the exam are actually drawn from newspapers. For example, there was a corruption allegation that one of the highways route has been changed to benefit one of the officials because the land prices are going to shoot up. There was a case study related to it. So what I would say is, instead of getting into the too many details, study. Then there is a standard book. Let me also do some advertisement, please read my book and so on. But the point is, book whichever you read, please don't get into too many books. Read from one source and read it effectively. And second, practice. Again, I would use the same quote by Rumi. आटा गूंदने वाला काम करना है, रोज गूंदना है, तभी वो गूंदेगा. ठीक है? So practice it daily and only then you will get into the flow. But otherwise, the kind of papers that you are getting in UPSC these days, they are extremely lengthy. unless and until you are already in the flow when you enter the exam hall, you won't be able to complete the paper. So this thing has to be done beforehand. So I think.
Right, sir. Shikhar is asking, could you please provide some answer writing tips or basic format that one should follow for both section A and section B of ethics?
See, for section A, हाँ कि उसमें section वेक्शन तो अब change हो चुके हैं, but for simple 10 marks or 15 marks non-case study answers, the format remains standard. There should be a introduction, there should be a body, there should be a conclusion. And I would say that in many ethics answers, people do not have enough theoretical content, which is also legitimate. You cannot have so much theory to write 2.5 or 2 or 3 pages on the same topic. So one technique that I used, which worked for me, which worked for many of my friends also, is try to include an example. And that example can be prepared in advance. If you have, say, 50 ready-made examples that you have been using during the practice, then bringing that example and modifying it, customizing it according to the requirement of the answer is not very difficult. So that particular example is also going to give you some space that is going to help you fill the page, and also going to give an impression to the examiner that you don't just know the theory, you know how it is applied. Now coming to the case studies are extremely dynamic. So you have to be dynamic in that way. If I give you one rigid framework, then that rigid framework might not be very much applicable. For example, when I was giving exam, one particular format was very much in trend, that every time you get a case study, you are going to create 4 alternatives. Then you are going to talk about pros and cons, and then you are going to write a conclusion. Out of the 4, you chose first one or second one, and because of so reason. Then UPSC for the next few times really, I would say, thrashed this model, because most of the questions they asked, this model really didn't fit in. For example, this 2017 answer, they really didn't give any options. They simply asked why such cases are happening. So this model doesn't fit in. So again, I would totally avoid having a rigid mindset, especially for case studies. One thing I can focus on is, first of all, identify core issue. Core issue should be clear. If you cannot get into the core issue within the first or second paragraph, then the examiner is going to lose interest. Second, highlight important points. And third, be lucid. When I say lucid, I'm not saying that you should use the language of Shakespeare. What I'm saying is that your communication should be clear. And that is going to come from the practice reading newspaper. There are many terms which are very impactful in the exam. For example, you never say this is a problem. You always say this is a challenge. You never say Maoism in exam. You always say left-wing extremism. So those terms have evolved over the time. But when you get the newspaper, you try to borrow the vocabulary from there. This lucidness comes. So at max, I can say only these 3 things. Other than that, you will have to develop your own style.
Right. Sir, Abhimanyu is asking again, should we include sports examples also, like doping or age issues, to make effective answer, or should we add from GS syllabus only?
Why not? For example, I'm very surprised that doping is considered to be out of syllabus for UPSC. Doping is a prime topic. For example, many times there are allegations that many medicines which were used by foreign athletes to win some medals were later on banned when they were also getting started to be used by Indian athletes. That is a debate. But
right.
Again, similarly, there are many questions related to sports which have been asked in, I think, mains as well as prelims. So sports examples are a very good category. If you can use them effectively and in the right context, you are most welcome.
Great. Sir, Deepak is asking, sir, in case studies, can we apply the same techniques like awareness or persuasion or technology in every answer? Is it a standard structure we can follow?
No, there is no standard structure. Don't use awareness and technology just for the sake of it. For example, I was just quoted the example during the lecture that one of the persons was using that we are going to use AI, ML, blockchain. So blockchain is not the solution of everything. In fact, one of the Latin American countries converted their currency to blockchain and now they are facing hyperinflation. So that is a different thing altogether. So don't use technology just because you want to use technology in the answer. If you really have a use case for technology, then use it. Similarly, if there is an issue of convincing people to do something, if you really want to introduce a social change, if you really want to introduce some behavioral change, then perhaps the persuasion enters into picture. But if it is not relevant, then why include it?
Right. Sir, Ajay is curious that case studies these days are very long. So nowadays, how do we apply all the techniques you said in the limited time?
So again, Atai Gunna basically. So the idea is that you cannot be many times, for example, let me give you an example. How does Sachin Tendulkar or Mahendra Singh Dhoni or Virat Kohli decides which shot to take? So if you start analyzing that वहाँ पे ball गिरी और इतनी speed से आ रही है, you cannot be actually in a decision mode. It has to come inherently from you. It should become your habit to make those decisions. And that is why the practice is not for just for your convenience. With practice, some habits develop कि ये भी possibility है. वो possibility तभी आपके दिमाग में आएगी when you have practiced it enough. So for example, I might take a lot of time in deciding technical questions, suppose say computer science, because I was trained in mechanical engineering. But for a computer scientist, for example, it might be just a second's job. Similarly, there was one famous chess grandmaster. He is considered to be one of the most intuitive players, Mikhail Tal. So regarding him, Gary Kasparov has said that he used to just look at the chessboard and without really making any calculation, he will decide what move he will make. And he was playing the chess since age 3. And that is what happens when you are practicing for that long.
Right, excellent example, sir. Sir, Suvidhi wants to know again, could you complete your ethics paper when you were giving the attempt?
Yes.
Entirely?
Yes.
Okay. Shikhar is again asking, is there any standard approach for answering quote-based questions? I think he has answered this. Also, if we are connecting theory and concepts of ethics with real-life examples, does diverse example play any role for extra marks?
Yes. Diversity is important in all answers. If you are diverse in your examples, in your connections, that shows the breadth of your thinking. Let me tell you, all administrative jobs in government, it is a generalist job. It is not a job of an expert. So if you want to have a technical expert, then you can always bring in a guy from IIT or say even from MIT if need be. But what is expected of you in government is that you will give attention to a breadth of interests to all sections of the society from different perspectives. And that is actually a problem with many of the technocrats. They give very technically efficient solutions which might not work in practical governance. So I think diversity matters. If you can bring the diversity in your examples, in your applications of those concepts which you have studied in ethics, it definitely adds value to your answer.
Sir, Abhimanyu wants to know again. Sir, for ethics in rough sheet, is it true like map making similar to essay paper fetches extra marks, or it is a myth?
In ethics, why would you draw a map? To be honest, I cannot think
in rough sheet, he's asking.
Nobody is looking at the rough sheet. People, I don't think examiner will have time to look at your answers enough. So I'm very sure that they are not going to look at your rough sheet. But one thing I can tell you is many of the people I know and I myself drew some flowcharts. So if, for example, the flowchart I drew regarding RTI, information, transparency and accountability. So there was some other similar, but I made a circle and I clarified that this is how the things flow. So if similarly there was a question related to conflict of interest, I made a flow chart, I made some arrows, I just demonstrated my thinking. If you can just add some value through your diagram, it is advisable. You shouldn't avoid it just because it is ethics paper. But again, be relevant, be contextual.
Sir, final question, and I guess this is the best question to end this session. The question is, sir, I'm a fresher, yet to start ethics. Can you give me advice on how to approach preparation of this subject?
Buy my book. Again, I'm sorry.
Very good answer.
Again, I'm sorry, but the point is, I would say that ethics is a topic which is most related to anyone's life. For example, for starting in economics, you will have to read some basics. But to start in ethics, you don't need some ethics. You don't need to read a book or two. So what I would say is, pick a book. And again, my sources are only two. Pick any book and pick the newspaper. So just read the headline of any news item. So many people killed. Fire in train or fire in building. So many people killed. Think about it. What went wrong ethically? Who are the, just, if not who are responsible, if not the debate, can you just ask one question for it? How will you fix responsibility for that? The crux of introducing ethics in UPSC civil services exam is that we want civil servants who can take the responsibility, who are responsible enough. Even in interviews, you are always told that you should always portray yourself as a person who is responsible, who is ready to come forward and show some leadership skill. So in any news item, obviously read the book. Theory is important. Theory is going to bring a new perspective. For example, howsoever curious you may be about science, but if you are not reading Newton, then you will have to reinvent the whole wheel. So book is going to prevent you from wasting your time in reinventing the whole cycle of ethical thought. But again, by reading the book, you will have to internalize that whole cycle instead of reinventing it. And again, you will have to apply here and talk about responsibility. So if someone says that there is so much electoral corruption, think about who is responsible or what is responsible for it. From there, all sorts of questions emerge, because can you just blame the politicians? No, they emerge from the society. Can you really blame the society? Because not everyone is corrupt. So as soon as you start trying to fix the responsibility, you get into an ethical debate. And that is what you should be open for. Unless and until you start to think in terms of a debate. Think, if you are blaming a politician, put yourself in the shoes of a politician. People are voting for him or her, and that's why he or she is getting selected. Then what is wrong in what he is doing? The society is accepting him. If the society is doing this, then what exactly is the blame of society? Our culture might be that. But can we really blame our culture? Our culture changes. So that sort of thing always continues. And once you get into that line of thought, your ethical study is complete. If you have not reached an impasse in your ethical debate, then perhaps you haven't understood the ethics properly. Because we are debating ethics because the answers are very hard to come.
Sir, could you write your name of the book once again so
please.
that it gets clear to our audience? Yes, it is Ethics and Morality from Vice to Virtue. So thank you so much, sir, Rahul sir. It was a pleasure and it was an amazing session. Please give a huge round of applause once again for Rahul sir.
Thank you so much.
And thank you guys for joining us offline and online as well. I'm very sure it will help you a lot in your paper 4. Thank you so much.
ले लो भाई मैं तो ओपन ही ठीक है थैंक यू सो मच ओके मेरा कुछ तो नहीं है
Great.